All right, thanks. I want to thank everybody for joining today. My name is Jen Walling. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Environmental Council. And we are really excited to have our transportation town hall today. This is the fifth in our series of 6 town halls. And this is really to keep our community informed on the basics of issues, but also hear from our community and all of you about what you think should be prioritized in policy. And as you know, IEC works a lot with the state legislature, but also with the city. And so this transportation policy is really important. We have such a talented group of people who are going to present today that I can't wait to introduce. But I also think it's an area that the environmental community is getting more and more involved in. There's always been a conservation aspect to transportation planning, and there's a carbon aspect and pollution aspect to the type of transportation items that we are using. But I think that there's been a lot of ways that this issue hasn't been a focus of what we're doing. So I think that this is going to be a great town hall today, and I'm going to learn stuff, and feel free. I'm just going to go through, like I said, thank you for joining. There's going to be sort of 3 parts. We're going to talk a little bit about the state of the state, where we go from here, that the presenters are going to cover, and then we're going to take public comment. At most of these, it's been questions from folks, so feel free to put questions in the chat box. And once the presenters are done, they're each going to get 5 minutes. After they are done completely, all 5 of them, you're welcome to also have a public comment. So feel free to not limit yourself to just questions. If you want to speak for 3 minutes on a transportation topic that's important to you, that's your time, but we are going to limit it to 3 minutes. You can use the raise hand function, which is under, if you click on the participant box, that is where you can click on the raise hand function. Or you can let me know in the chat box, or you can message me. Any of those ways to let me know that you would like to add some feedback. And like I said as well, you're also welcome to just type your comment into the chat box. We have our summer intern, Ben, who's in our Springfield office, who is taking some copious notes today. We're going to produce a memo and then take it to all of our experts and make some decisions about where to go next. I'm going to tell you who all the presenters are, but I will be presenting all of them as we go ahead. We're first going to have Audrey Winnick from Metropolitan Planning Council. Then we'll have Jackie Grimshaw from Center for Neighborhood Technology, Stacy Myers from Openlands, Susan Munn from Environmental Law and Policy Center, and Kyle Whitehead from Active Transportation Alliance are going to be our wonderful speakers. And so we are going to get started now with Audrey, who is going to be the only presenter to share slides. Everybody else is going to be speaking. So go ahead, Audrey, take yourself off mute, and let's do this.
Okay, everyone can see my slides? All right, so hi, thanks so much for inviting MPC to be part of this panel today. As Jen said, I'm the Director of Transportation at MPC. My name is Audrey Winnick, and I think I want to present a topic that can seem very technical, but I think is really important as we think about the big picture of transportation and how it relates to the environment and the kind of results we want from our transportation. So historically, when we plan transportation over the past 50 to 70 years, the highway era, we have prioritized transportation largely based on cars going fast. And that has had a number of impacts to the way we develop our regions and our cities, the types of transportation that's available, safety, and the environment. And so performance-based planning is a concept that tries to take a holistic look at how we make investments in transportation and what factors we consider as we're making those investments, so that we're looking comprehensively at how we're spending our public money and are we getting what we want for our residents. So the idea here is to really focus on what people need. not what cars need. And people need to get places. They need to get to their jobs and amenities in their communities. They want to live in livable communities, and this is probably where the environment part fits the most. Non-polluted. They want to have options to bike and walk, etc. And we also, in an era of resources that are constrained, we don't have unlimited dollars. We know that now more than ever. We need to maintain what we have. We have a lot of transit, we have a lot of roads. We need to maintain it in good condition and not be building more if we're not going to be able to maintain it. So those are some of the precepts of performance-based planning. So I'm just going to show you one slide that sort of gives a sense of what this looks like if you want to operationalize it. It's basically using criteria. If you have a list of transportation projects that people have proposed, it's basically using criteria to determine which are the best ones to spend our money on. I'm showing you this slide of a set of criteria that was developed by Illinois Department of Transportation a few years ago. And it gives a sense of the types of things you can look at. And you'll see under livability, environmental impact, also access to active transportation, multimodal choices. What I want everyone to come away with is to know that while this is a great exercise that IDOT did, they are not currently doing this. They're not currently using these criteria, and we would like them to do so, and we'd like them to update them, including to add equity. You see the little box on the bottom. So just want everyone to know that there are efforts that have gone on. These are good practices. These are best practices, but we are in a position where we want to advocate that this gets institutionalized in Illinois. And then I know my time's probably just about up. I also want to just point out the importance of equity, equity and environmental justice. Those are very, very linked. And if you want to read a little bit more about performance measures and equity, there's some new research on Metropolitan Planning Council's website that you can take a look at. And with that, I will finish up. I know we have a lot of speakers. And I will stop screen sharing.
Thank you. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna spotlight video. Jackie Grimshaw, you are next. So go ahead. You have to get off mute.
I am unmuted. You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our transit agencies and COVID-19. So as we know, our transit agencies are suffering from tremendous ridership losses, Metro and PACE more so than CTA. But CTA continued to operate the same schedule during the shutdown as they did before, while Metro and PACE reduced or limited their service schedules. Now, nationally, there are about 2.8 million essential workers in America who rely on public transit to get where they need to go. I couldn't find the exact number for Chicago area. That's why I'm giving you national things. But as we know, we depend on their being able to do their work. And without CTA's continued service, many of the essential workers would have been unable to get to their employment sites. And CTA's ability to monitor passenger loading allowed them to replace their 42-foot buses with 60-foot articulated buses to allow for social distancing on these heavy ridership routes, which are mainly on the south and west sides of the city. CTA, being a much larger system than the other two, is suffering obviously from much larger revenue losses. And since our system is funded by sales tax, the economic impact of sheltering in place is it's contributing to huge revenue losses. And also remember that our transit systems have a fare box recovery ratio of 50%. And it's not clear how the General Assembly will accommodate the agencies not meeting this, this requirement. The CARES Act passed by Congress provided emergency relief for lost transit funding, but it's going to run out. And if the U.S. House passed HEROES Act is not passed by the Senate, and that HEROES Act includes additional funding, it's going to put additional strain on the finances of our system. And if revenue losses are not bad enough, the transit agencies have had to endure new expenses. CDC cautioned that the virus can be passed through touching things where the virus may have landed. So consequently, the agencies have had to invest in cleaning equipment, disinfectants, and the personnel to use them that were not in their original budget. The agencies also had to purchase personal protective equipment for public facing as well as cleaning and maintenance crews. And even with the PPEs, workers have fallen ill and the budgets have had to accommodate additional sick leave. So with the CARES Act funding, the agencies feel that they can get through financially to the first quarter of 2021. Some of us doubt that, but that's what they're saying. So we have to believe them. But what we do know is what we also don't know is whether or not they are making plans for what happens if there's not enough funding, like either service cuts or layoffs or slowing down of capital projects that require a local match. Being prudent stewards, I suspect that the agencies are looking at longer term implications of funding, ridership, and expenses. So I think we've all heard talk about riders being reluctant to using the system because of fears of overcrowding and cleanliness. Nationally, I'm not aware of any specific outbreaks or large-scale infections tied to transit, as opposed to areas of high interpersonal contacts like bars, beaches, and other overcrowded places. The transit agencies did institute these new safety measures, including rear boarding, although that's discontinued now, frequent sanitization of places and of spaces and equipment, and installing signs and physical barriers to enforce 6-foot perimeters between riders and drivers, and encouraging or requiring riders to wear masks. So people returning to public transportation can expect a comprehensive set of safety protocols based on recommendations from the CDC. These include the mandatory face covering for riders and operators, physical distancing markers, and limited capacity on all vehicles. CTA even welcomed back riders by distributing these sanitizing packs, which included masks and hand sanitizers. But transit safety in this COVID-19 era will largely depend on riders complying with CDC guidelines as they travel through the transit stations and while riding on our buses. But most importantly, staying home if they're feeling sick or showing symptoms or illness. CTA created a dashboard for riders to have a sense of crowding on approaching buses. Riders should plan and give themselves extra time, as buses may have to bypass stops if they're at their new capacity limits. And CTA is also encouraging riders to use other options such as walking and bicycling whenever possible for short trips. The agencies are also aware that they must win back public confidence. So riding buses really ranks as a moderate risk activity, and cities where public transportation has returned to pre-lockdown capacity, such as in Seoul, Berlin, and Tokyo, there have been no new coronavirus spikes traced to mass transit usage. And if riders are concerned, they can make sure they give themselves space, wear a mask, bring sanitizers, or wipe down seats and armrests if it makes them feel safer. So for returning to, I'm talking too long, so let me finish there. So riders are as important as what the agencies have done. We need to be courteous, we need to be patient, and we need to use CTA and Metro and PACE. Thanks. I'm gonna stop there because I took up too much time.
That's great, Jackie. Courteous, patient, and use CTA. Those are some words to live by. Great. I'm going to now spotlight Stacy Myers, who's going to talk about broad NEPA issues as well. Go ahead, Stacy.
You're muted, Stacy.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, Jen. We really appreciate it, especially on this issue. On July 15th, this month, President Trump unilaterally weakened the procedural rules of the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and it's one of the nation's bedrock conservation laws. The rollback limits public review of infrastructure projects that have a federal nexus through funding, programs, or involvement to speed up permitting of highways, power plants, pipelines, wetland permits, and a host of other transportation infrastructure, such as the Peatone Airport. In sum, the rollbacks shrink the scope and applicability of NEPA, undermine the integrity and value of the environmental review process, and restrict public input and judicial review. Industry can now skew the purpose and need for projects. Regardless of conflicts of interest, agencies can now allow industry to conduct their own NEPA reviews. Lead agency can only consider alternatives within their jurisdiction, eliminating public transit, local alternatives, and anything else that would make a lot more sense. Agencies no longer need to rigorously explore and objectively evaluate all reasonable alternatives, rendering the stop and look statute at a glance in the rearview mirror. NEPA, the review has shrunk. Agencies no longer consider cumulative impacts like the effects of sprawl or climate change. This gives lip service to considering regional planning, exacerbates impacts to divested communities, and will make us less resilient and competitive. NEPA has been significant in exposing gaps in data or contortions of facts. My favorite is that migratory birds, as common sense would dictate, since they are mobile creatures, will fly away from any disturbance. That's grassland birds that are globally imperiled. We've seen several instances where initial GIS spatial layers are wrong or inaccurate, and needed experts and members of the affected communities to augment or to rectify their assumptions. That's now gone. The public voice is greatly diminished in the streamlined process. This is an umbrella statute allowing the public a one place to review and comment on alternatives and impacts under a host of laws: Migratory Bird Treaty Act, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act. That outlet has now greatly shrunk. Agencies don't have to respond to comments anymore. They can just summarize generally what they receive and certify that they considered them. And this self-certification is creating now a conclusive presumption that judges are to accept that in court, that they adequately took everybody into account. And if we as the public don't object to the summaries within 30 days, this new rule forfeits our right to further object. That's what the rule now says. That means if agencies know that, also agencies can only comment within their jurisdiction. So if they know something valuable, they're now gagged unless it's narrowly within their wheelhouse. So what does this mean? In addition to putting the cart before the horse, before the NEPA process is even complete, proponents can start buying land and equipment now. This is sorely compounded by rollbacks to other cornerstone laws, such as the shrinking of what is now defined as WOTUS. And that means if the Army Corps finds a wetland is no longer protected, the NEPA process may not even occur. So this is part of the death of 1,000 cuts of deregulation. We're already seeing the bastardization of the NEPA process. In the draft environmental impact statement for the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, they've already contorted the purpose and need and basically done an end run to bootstrap an alternative that is a self-fulfilling prophecy from a change they made in policy contrary to law in 100 years of standing practice as well as international treaty to basically self-justify an end result. So what can we do? What are we left with now that this change is finalized? Well, if and when the administration changes, we need to call upon our state and federal leaders to shout for rollbacks to be rescinded. That means we need to lay the groundwork for this change well before that occurs so that we don't wait years for us to have NEPA protections. If we don't see an administrative change, we have a hard choice in the state level. It is possible for Illinois to adopt a state version of NEPA. That is a difficult lift. As Jen could tell you, it's a very political piece. And the question is, do we have the political will? Now, this also doesn't stop the snowball of other impacts from infrastructure projects due to losses of other environmental protections. We can, as Audrey very well put, revise and institutionalize comprehensive performance standards that fully integrate and adequately balance social justice, climate change impacts, community sense of place, agricultural preservation, and environmental health for both people and wildlife, to bake those into the preliminary considerations of projects so that it can somewhat compensate for parts that we have lost of NEPA. And last, we need to continue to challenge any abuses and inadequacy of major project reviews, such as the final EIS of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act on the federal level, but also any new studies that come out of the boondoggle projects like the Piatone Airport, which we have money now in our budget appropriated almost 200 million to launch, as far as the interchanges, and a tremendous call for Amazon and others to now launch and really start moving on. This will give us a record and litany of evidence to help decision makers justify eliminating the new procedural rules and reinstating, hopefully, some semblance of what we affectionately now call normal. So that's all I have on NEPA, and I'm happy to take questions at the end.
Great, thanks, Stacy. So now we are heading over to Susan Mudd. Let me spotlight that video. There we go. Susan, take it away.
Hello. Today, it seems that we are in this town hall meeting covering transportation issues at a large scale and covering both some of the bad things that are happening right now and some of the hopeful signs. And I'm going to touch on some of each. The topic that I'm covering today, as asked, is the electrification of transportation. And you might well ask, why would we talk about electrification of transportation given all the other things going on here? The reason is, there's a number of reasons. One is that transportation now rivals buildings and stationary sources in greenhouse gas emissions, each nearly 1/3 of the sources of climate forcing emissions. Transportation also, especially in Chicago, is surpassing some other sectors in nitrogen oxide emissions. In Chicago, more than 87% of nitrogen oxide emissions come from the transportation sector, or mobile sources as they're known. And why is that important? Because nitrogen oxide is one of the precursors to the ozone or smog conditions that we've had during the last week and affects people's health. These mobile sources also contribute small particulate matter, which is an asthma inducer, and black carbon, which is a climate forcer. So there's many reasons to be concerned about the current emissions from the current way that we transport people and goods in Chicago, in Illinois, and beyond. Chicago and Illinois, as each of you know from living in this region, are the crossroads of our nation's rail systems, major truck routes, intermodal hubs. We've got, as Jackie pointed out, the second largest public transportation system, the second largest rail system with over 1,300 freight, passenger, and commuter trains passing through the Chicago region every day. The current transportation mix is harming people, especially people of color and low-income individuals. Even when car traffic went down earlier this year due to COVID, truck and delivery traffic in Chicago was not down nearly as much and was reduced less than across the rest of the nation. So especially low-income communities with people of color, where freight and delivery trucks and buses crisscross frequently every day, they did not get the air and health relief that one should have expected and that some other places did experience from air pollution reduction. So we can be these hubs of interstate commerce and of people in a way that doesn't involve causing so much harm to people every day and contributing to our climate problems. We are currently negatively impacting children's health, the elderly health, and the climate through especially the diesel and gas sources that we currently use in our transportation system. We can change this, but still be important economically by changing to electric in many instances. There are now over 100 models of electric buses, electric trucks, and electric equipment that can replace the current diesel and other fuel sources. Transit buses, as Jackie so critically pointed out, are important and necessary for essential workers and others, but essentially, effectively and most for our essential workers. And transit riders are predominantly, over 60% are African American. So we're impacting, this is a racial equity issue as well. And transit buses are now available in electric forms. We all know that the CTA has made a pledge on this, as has the mayor and city council. We need to hold them to moving, as we move beyond COVID, to help transition to cleaner buses. Similarly, we need to fix our school bus fleet. Why school buses? Most people don't know that school buses carry more people every day than than planes, trains, and buses. Across the US, it's 25 million children a day, at least when schools are in session, and 1 million children in Illinois. Kids are among the most vulnerable, and riding diesel buses is often the worst air that they experience every day, affecting their lung development and increasing school day absences. As our schools are spread out, which Kyle may be getting to, not allowing kids to walk or bike to school as used to be the case, we need kids to be in cleaner electric buses, and those are starting to come to Illinois this year. While it used to be the case that one could say that electric vehicles rely on a filthy electricity generation sector, that is less and less true every year. Even in the Midwest, as solar and wind pick up and increase in terms of electricity generation, and as battery storage and solar continue to improve and get cheaper, it's more and more the case that as we clean up the grid and electrify transportation, they go hand in hand and support and enhance each other. So electric vehicles should not be seen or allowed to be divisive, as they sometimes have seemed to be, as we strive for racial and social equity. In the 2 utility territories in the nation with the most electric vehicles, currently mostly autos, electric vehicles are actually helping to drive down electricity rates. EVs there have contributed over $100 million than their associated costs. In other words, these are contributions that are help keeping rates down for electricity customers. So what are some of the things we can do here in Illinois? Right now, we could be urging Governor Pritzker to sign the multi-state medium and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicle memorandum of understanding, recently signed by California and 15 states across the country. This would coordinate states' activities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and move these medium and heavy-duty trucks and buses towards electric. We can ensure and help that the city and CTA have the resources and stay on track to convert the CTA bus fleet, all 1,800 of them, to EVs. We can work with communities to get them EV ready. Chicago has recently passed an ordinance, and the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus has recently completed its EV ready checklist for the 200 plus communities that it serves and is a model for others. We can focus or refocus Illinois EPA's expenditures of VW dollars away from diesel and towards more electric. We can get EPA to spend the $70 million that the capital budget allocated for electric vehicle supply equipment. We can urge our utilities, as Ameren has already done, to help with electric, for instance, electric school buses, but other electrification. We can support lots of legislation that's currently pending in Congress that we can hope will move in the spring, that will, in terms of moving forward on all this electrification. I'm going to stop now because I think I've run out of time. Thank you all, and look forward to questions later.
Great, thank you. And now we've got Kyle from Mining Transportation Alliance, who is going to talk with us.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks everybody for being here. For anybody who's not familiar, Active Trans advocates for walking, biking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities. So we are active on all the issues you heard about from the previous speakers, and they're great partners of ours, as are several other IEC affiliates. But today I'm going to talk about walking and biking policy. So I think as most people have seen in their communities, we've seen a surge in walking and biking during the pandemic, both for recreation and for transportation. Our organization is really focused on the transportation side and trying to encourage and make it safer and easier for more people to be walking and biking to get where they need to go. So when we think about how we can move the needle on that issue and improve that sidewalk in your community or improve that bike lane and make it a protected bike lane in your neighborhood, a lot of that is set by policy at the state level and specifically the State Department of Transportation. And unfortunately, our State Department of Transportation, like many other state DOTs across the country, does not have a great track record when it comes to walking and biking in transit and designing roads for everybody. There's a traditional engineering model that is kind of the default within IDOT, which is to focus on moving as many cars as possible, as quickly as possible through a certain corridor, through a certain intersection. So when they're designing a road and making an investment, oftentimes that's what their priority is. So through the years, Active Trans, working with several people and organizations on this call right now, have tried to kind of move the rock up the hill a little bit and encourage the state to be more progressive and to consider the health and safety of everybody who's using this street. And we've had ups and downs in that fight, but we're still very much in the middle of it right now. One example, just from last year's Capitol bill, obviously a major piece of infrastructure legislation, the first in more than a decade in Illinois. And we, working with many others, were able to establish a new pot of state funding for walking and biking projects. So that's $50 million per year to support high-impact walking and biking projects all across the state, including here in the Chicago region. So after successfully getting that included in last year's Capitol bill, we spent a lot of time working directly with IDOT and working with partners across the state to try to provide input on that program as they're setting it up and preparing to roll it out. It is scheduled to come out later this summer. There's also some strong equity provisions in that legislation, which requires them to share at least 25% of the funds with high-need communities and reduces the cost of the project for low-income communities to the point where the state could be covering 100% of the cost in the highest need areas. So there are some performance planning metrics for how these dollars are being distributed. So it's kind of a very small version of what Arju was describing and what we would like to see happen at scale with all of the transportation dollars in the state. And then it's related to another issue that we were working on and to introduce legislation on before the pandemic, which currently there's a state requirement that the local community has to cover 20% of the cost of a complete streets feature on a roadway project. So if the state is rebuilding a road in Chicago or Northbrook or Harvey, and Harvey is interested in adding a sidewalk or a bike lane or an enhanced crosswalk, Harvey is forced to cover 20% of that cost for construction and 100% of the maintenance cost. And what we've seen is that requirement is a huge barrier to these projects getting built, particularly in lower income areas that can't come up with the funds. So what happens is the state moves forward with a project that doesn't include anything that enhances the safety and convenience for people walking and biking. So we feel that if we could eliminate that requirement and get the state to cover 100% of the cost of every aspect of the roadway, just like they're covering 100% of the travel lane, they should be covering 100% of the sidewalk and the bike lane or the side path. That would be another way we can move the needle and move the rocket just a bit further up the hill on this issue. So if you want to take action on some of those issues and more in the walking, biking, and transit arena. You can check out activetrans.org/takeaction on our website, where we have some current action alerts targeting elected officials at the local and the state level, as well as the federal level right now. Really active in the COVID relief legislation and trying to make sure that it considers the needs of our transit agencies, and also the need to help communities meet the demand of increased walking and biking that we've seen throughout the pandemic. So as soon as you take action on any of those alerts, you'll be added to our supporter list, and we'll keep you in the loop and identify opportunities for you to take action moving forward. I look forward to hearing from everybody, and please reach out during or afterwards if you have any questions or want to get involved with our work.
Oh, thank you, Kyle. And I know there's been a bunch of questions in the chat that people have been answering. I think I may want to just go through and cover some of them, and folks should feel free to answer these. Tanisha asked a question, and maybe this is Jackie could start. Do you know what criteria they would use if CTA has to cut service? Oh, I think you're on mute, Jackie.
Sorry about that. CTA really doesn't publish the criterion they use for doing service cuts, but I do know that a big consideration is given to ridership. So on routes that have fewer riders than other routes, but it's not like 100% the lowest ridership gets cut, because it depends upon what the origin destination of a route might be. So if a ridership is lower than others, but it serves a particular hospital or major job source or whatever, it would not just automatically be cut. But I would say ridership still is the predominant criteria that is used for service cuts.
Mm-hmm. That's something we definitely need to think about for our policy priorities. So I know you answered this in here too, but do you want to talk, Susan, about any specific subsidies or policies in place for public transit electrification? This might be a good time to re-reference VW and the work we're doing there. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
It's okay now?
Yep.
Thank you, Jen. So currently there's limited funding at the federal level under the FTA's Low-No program that can support and has supported to date some of CTA's electrification efforts. CTA has about 1,800 buses. I'm sure Jackie will tell me if I've got the number wrong. They're all but 2 of them are diesel. And those 2 electric ones so far have been going well for a couple years now. And CTA wants to electrify and is undergoing a study right now as to how to do it and how fast it can do it. It's being done by Sam Schwartz Engineering. So there's this Low-No funding. There's also potential for a lot more with the Moving Forward Act, HR 2, and a number of other bills which are pending in Congress, which of course we don't expect action on this year, but come January, there's hopes that there could be a lot more. Otherwise, here in the state, there is money in the VW Mitigation Trust Fund, as Jen alluded to. 30% of Illinois' plan was to go towards public transit. And in the initial round, there was money for CTA and for Metra and PACE. We believe that the VW program here in Illinois could be improved by getting IEPA to revise the plan, as it certainly is allowed to do under the VW settlement, and direct more of the money towards electric vehicles, such as transit buses, as it chooses how to spend the money.
Thank you. Steve had put in a comment, the transit needs to be safer from COVID filtering, ventilations, barrier shields, etc. I mean, I know the electrification grants are going to take a while, but just related to that comment, I wonder between Jackie and Susan, do you think that some of the public transportation electrification, if it were moved forward quickly, could also address some of the COVID concerns?
Jackie, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, one of the things that happens, and Susan is the expert on the electric bus, although if folks want to ride an electric bus, they're on the Chicago Avenue route,
Right.
2 buses that we have. So if you haven't experienced them, you know, it's a place to go try them out. But the electric buses have a better air filtration system than the diesel. Well, we really don't have a lot of diesel buses anymore, but they have a better air filtration system, and so it can provide some additional safety in terms of virus being stagnant in the bus versus being infiltrated out. Susan, I have that right? The filtration system.
Yes. Yes. Jackie,
Right.
Jackie covered it perfectly.
Great. Stacy, do you want to cover just really quick the folks that asked questions about NEPA and Congress? I know you answered them in the chat, but do you want to maybe just quickly address that?
Sure. So CEQ is in charge of Council of Environmental Quality, all of the administrative rules that move through for different agencies. And it basically spearheaded the NEPA regulatory rollbacks. It is an administrative change. It is not a congressional act like you would find as a statutory change. So it can be rolled back by a new administration. In fact, if you look at WOTUS, it's been a ping pong match. Every time a new administration comes in, they have their take on where that line should be set. So in that regard, fortunately and unfortunately, it is easier to be able to change administrative rules than it is an act of Congress. Does that answer?
Well, thank you, Stacy. So I don't know if Marta and Audrey want to address, you're having a little discussion about, and Kyle, about IDOT being responsible for maintenance and the matching projects. What's the issue there that we need to pay attention to?
Well, I guess my experience, I'll pick on Kendall County and Yorkville, specifically the city of Yorkville. They had a massive project being done by the state for Route 34, and they were the first city that I know of that actually turned down the matching grants. And they cited maintenance and they cited 20% match as being the reasons why. Now, there was a lot of concerned residents who actually took up the cause, and they pledged to raise funds, and they worked with a lot of the businesses throughout the area and did that. They actually raised, I want to say, $20,000 in matching funds just to push the city off the dime and make the city do that project. But in general, that has been in this area the cadence of what happens every time there is an improvement going on at an intersection of State Route 71 and Route 126 right now, and there is nothing being done for pedestrians in that area. And this is the second time they've done improvements to that intersection. Every time it's done, the state has that offer on the table, and every time the county board votes it down. Now it's just the intersection, it's not the whole highway, but if we're looking forward, why aren't we doing the intersection when we have the opportunity? So, and that's near a school route. If people actually wanted to bike or walk to school, and there's no emphasis there. I guess my other concern that I didn't raise in the chat, but I'll just throw it out there, is that I love the state program, and I'd love to see improvements to the state program, but on a local level, and I'll throw Will County under the bus on this one. Our local municipalities in Will County, and this is true in Kendall County as well, do not have any kind of incentive programs when they want to do these projects from the county. So if you would like to see your county highway or your township road improved to make it more pedestrian friendly or make it more bike friendly, they are not helping. So I don't know if there's anything we can do about that, but I throw it out there.
Yeah, I mean, those are all important points. And I think, you know, one thing we do have a transportation planning consultancy within Active Trans. And, you know, one thing we try to do is work with municipalities and at the county level as well to develop walking, biking, and active transportation plans, so that as they are setting out to rebuild the road, they can refer back to this plan and see if there's an opportunity to make an improvement. Now that's not foolproof, of course, because those plans get old fast, and they're often not binding and you know, influencing decision making at the highest level. So, you know, I think as you were speaking to, Marta, we're seeing increased public grassroots support for these types of improvements and these types of projects. But I don't think the elected officials have quite caught up with that yet. So, you know, that's our responsibility as advocates and organizers to get in touch with people, help them connect, whether it's in Will County or, you know, a neighborhood in the city of Chicago, and give them the resources and support that they need so they can organize locally and affect change. I mean, we've helped an advocate we're working with in Batavia for some time. She ultimately decided to run for the city council and now has a seat there and has made this a big priority for her. So, you know, and that's not going to happen everywhere. But that's the type of organizing, the type of political leadership that we need, because it is kind of a multi-tiered issue as you described.
Yeah, and if I could, this is Audrey, if I could just chime in too. Theoretically, our investments are supposed to be looked at holistically. There's a complete streets law at the state level. So IDOT is supposed to always be considering biking and pedestrian infrastructure. Now, we just talked about the fiscal match being a barrier, but I think we also believe that a lot of times things are just not getting done and we don't know why. And there has not been good evaluation of the complete streets laws implementation. It was passed more than a decade ago, but no one really knows where complete streets, so bike and ped infrastructure, has been implemented as a result of this law, and is it working? We also have a big traffic safety problem, and that's been getting worse. And that's partly related to not having bicycle and pedestrian facilities that are working for people. So anyway, I just wanted to flag that. That's another kind of state legislative element that I know Active Trans and MPC have been paying attention to and thinking about, you know, taking that on as well.
I don't know, maybe to pick on Brian Robercheski a bit there, you had commented about the CTA and taking delivery on some new electric buses. Do you have an update there you want to share?
Just what I said. I mean, CTA actually got money, CMAQ funds, to buy electric buses several years ago. They've also gotten some low-no funding from the federal government, again, a while back. And it takes a while to translate that into a purchase. So the purchase was made, and I can't remember if it was for 20 or 23 buses, somewhere around that. And they have started taking some of those orders, but they're kind of like shaking down the buses and testing them. And I don't think they're in revenue service yet, but it's only a small amount. And, you know, this is in the larger context is the, you know, the mayor originally committed to electrify the CTA by 2030. That's been pushed back to 2040. And that means significant investments need to be made now to be able to reach that goal. And that's not really happening. In fact, the CTA, you know, has a big slug of older buses, some of which predate 2006. And their strategy right now is to try and get a contract with a bus manufacturer to build, I think, 100 diesel buses, but there's options for up to buying 500 more diesel buses on top of that. So it's, you know, a little disappointing to see that, you know, at a critical juncture, we don't have the funding and we don't have the leadership to commit to fully electrifying the CTA. hopefully what Susan talked about with the Sam Schwartz planning exercise, which is supposed to flesh out a little bit more, what it would take to electrify the CTA fleet and how that would be done, would shed a little bit more light on the resources needed. But ultimately, it's going to be a political decision as to how fast that's going to happen.
Thanks, Brian. We just had a question. Where can I get info on the Complete Streets Law? Maybe Audrey or Kyle, you want to cover that one?
Yeah, I'll drop a link into the chat that some recent analysis that we did of the law and some state policy.
Cool. Thanks. And anybody should feel free questions or just, what are your thoughts on the things that we should prioritize? And if we don't have more, we'll end a little early, but feel free to do that. Why don't we, as we're doing that, why don't I just go around with the speakers? What's the one policy thing you think should happen in the next year that you want to prioritize and you want IEC and our affiliate members to prioritize? Susan, do you want to go first?
I'd say fix the VW money and the capital budget money and get it out there. That can help all of the things that have been talked about on this call.
Great. I know, Jackie, what's the one thing you think policy needs to focus on?
Yeah, if you can get the General Assembly to reduce our fare box recovery ratio or to give the agency some relief from having to do that 50% recovery, a 50% recovery ratio, that would be awesome.
It's really important right now, yeah. Kyle?
Yeah, I'll go with the local match issue, the 20 requirement for local municipalities to cover 20% of the cost of walking, biking, transit elements of state roadway projects.
Yeah. Stacy?
I have three. Roll back the rollbacks.
You also could just say like Peatone.
That's one of them. So roll back the rollbacks, fight bad projects that are atrocious under NEPA. Join us, please, in commenting and challenging boondoggles, as well as with Audrey's work. I think broadening performance standards to really fully encompass all of the impacts that we care about here so that it's baked into the system.
No more boondoggles. Audrey, what's one thing you think?
Well, I'll stick with what I've talked about today, which is institutionalizing, whether that's IDOT committing to institutionalizing its practices, or whether it's actually legislation being passed that legally requires them to institutionalize transparent performance-based planning, so that you have a broader view of all the elements you're considering when you're investing public money in transportation. And we spend billions of public dollars on these projects. And so projects that are having negative impacts, it's not okay, that are not delivering what we need. It's a lot of public money and we need to have more scrutiny of that.
Great, thank you everyone. And yes, the session is being recorded. You can review any of the previous sessions right now. They're on IEC's YouTube, youtube.com/ILMBiro, as well as all of our previous lunch and learns and other sessions like that are on our YouTube. We'll eventually have a website. We're going to produce a memo that's a result of this that we'll send around to folks. And so, feel free if you had feedback on other things that you'd like to see within transportation that you'd like us to prioritize at the city and state level, please let us know. And we're happy to take feedback as anytime. We're preparing for 21 session, but also the work that we do at City Council, County Board, and all of that. This is just the time that we are listening and learning and figuring out our priorities. So just again, these will be on our YouTube, which is just youtube.com/ILNBiro. And so we eventually will have them on our website, ilnbiro.org. But right now, just have them on our YouTube. You can watch any of the former ones, and this one will probably be up early next week. So thanks again, everybody, for being on. We really, really appreciate it. I think this was a fabulous session. and stay in touch and let us know what you think we should be working on. So thanks for being members of IEC and giving us your thoughts. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Pam.